Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where shadows stretch longer than the daylight and the quiet of the wild seems alive. Tonight, we're heading to Alaska, a land of endless winter nights, forgotten mining towns, and dark forests where the cold feels like it's watching you. These aren't campfire stories. They're true accounts, local legends, and first-hand encounters gathered from people who swore they'd never speak of them again. As we step into this frozen frontier together, remember, every sound carries farther in the cold, and sometimes, something might be listening back. Before we begin, make sure you've subscribed and tapped the bell. You don't want to miss what lurks in the next whisper. Now, pull your coat tight. The story begins here, where the ice holds secrets older than memory. Story 1. Echo people. The storm that hit Nome in November 1995 lasted 3 days. And when it finally ended, something came back with a silence that should never have been there. I am Thomas Rafferty. I am 58 years old. I was the night manager at the Nome Community Center back in '95, and I'm one of the last people who remembers what really happened during those 3 weeks after the storm. Most folks who lived through it have either left town or convinced themselves it was mass hysteria. But I know what I heard. I know what those things did to people. And I know they're still out there, waiting in the spaces between sounds, listening to everything we say. The storm hit on November 7th. A monster system that came screaming down from the Bering Strait with winds over 80 miles per hour. Power went out across the entire region. Phone lines down, roads impassable. Nome was cut off completely. Just 4,000 people huddled in their homes while the world outside tried to tear itself apart. I spent those 3 days at the community center. We set it up as an emergency shelter for folks who lost heat or were living in mobile homes that wouldn't survive the wind. About 60 people rode out the storm with me. Families with kids, elderly residents, a few tourists who had gotten stuck in town. We had generators, food, blankets, everything we needed to wait it out. The weird thing was how quiet it got inside. With that many people crammed into one building, you'd expect constant noise. Crying babies, people talking, someone snoring. But everyone seemed reluctant to speak above a whisper. Like the storm outside was listening. Like making too much noise would attract its attention. On the third day, the wind stopped. Just like that. One moment it was howling like a living thing. The next it was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Oppressive. It pressed against my eardrums like water pressure. Several people started crying. Not from relief. From something else. Something they felt but couldn't name. We opened the doors to assess the damage. The town looked like it had been bombed. Roofs torn off. Buildings collapsed. Debris scattered everywhere. But the strangest thing was the ice. The storm had coated everything in a layer of ice so smooth and clear it looked like glass. Every surface reflected and refracted light in strange ways. The whole town sparkled like it was made of crystal. That's when I first heard the echo. I was standing outside the community center, surveying the damage, when I heard my own voice coming from somewhere across the street. It was saying something I said hours earlier inside the building, telling someone the coffee was in the kitchen. But the voice wasn't quite right. The cadence was off. The tone was wrong. It sounded like me, but flattened somehow. Like a recording played through a bad speaker. I turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just empty street and glittering ice. Over the next few hours, other people started hearing it too. Their own voices echoing back to them from impossible distances. Conversations they had that morning repeating themselves from empty buildings. At first we thought it was an acoustic phenomenon. Something to do with the ice and the way sound was reflecting off all those smooth surfaces. The town, its only scientist, a geologist named Dr. Sarah Chen, suggested the storm had created unusual atmospheric conditions that were playing tricks on our hearing. But echoes don't wait 12 hours to repeat what you said. And they changed the words. It was the third day after the storm when things got really wrong. A woman named Patricia Oakes came running into the community center, screaming. She was in her 40s, a school teacher, normally calm and rational. But she was hysterical, kept saying the echo knew, kept saying it was telling everyone. We got her to sit down, gave her water, tried to calm her. She'd been at home, alone, talking to herself while she cleaned up storm damage. She'd been thinking out loud about an affair she had 10 years earlier. Something she'd never told anyone. A secret she'd buried deep. And then she heard it echoing back to her from the next room. Her own voice, repeating what she said. But not exactly. The echo was embellishing. adding details she hadn't spoken, revealing things she only thought, and the tone was mocking, cruel, like something was taking pleasure in exposing her shame. We thought she was having a breakdown, PTSD from the storm. But then Marcus Hill came in an hour later with the same story. He'd been talking to his brother on a satellite phone they finally got working. Private conversation about their father, his will, some family drama about inheritance. After he hung up, he heard the conversation repeating itself from somewhere in his house. But the echo was saying the parts he left out. The parts he'd been too ashamed to admit. His real feelings about his brother. The things he wanted to say but never did. By nightfall, half the town was reporting the same phenomenon. The echoes were getting stronger, lasting longer, and they weren't just repeating anymore. They were having conversations. People would hear their own voices talking back to them, asking questions, making observations, saying things they never said but had definitely thought. It was like something was reading their minds and using their own voices to torment them with their own thoughts. Dr. Chen tried to study it, set up recording equipment around town to capture the phenomenon. But the recordings came back empty. Whatever was making the echoes, it wasn't being picked up by microphones. It was only audible to human ears, and only to specific people. That's when we realized the echoes were targeted, personal. Each person was hearing their own echo, and only their echo. No one else could hear what you were hearing, which meant you couldn't prove it was real, couldn't get validation from anyone else. You were alone with your echo, and it knew everything about you. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. People stopped talking, stopped thinking out loud. Some stopped thinking at all, trying to keep their minds blank to avoid giving the echoes material. But that didn't work. The echoes started pulling up old memories, things people had forgotten or suppressed, childhood traumas, hidden desires, deep fears, and the echoes were cruel. They didn't just repeat your secrets. They twisted them, made them worse, found the most painful interpretation of every thought and spoke it back to you in your own voice until you couldn't tell what was real anymore. Until you couldn't trust your own memories because the echo had mixed lies with truth so thoroughly that everything became suspect. People started breaking. The first suicide was on day 5. A man named Robert Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, 42 years old, family man, ran a hardware store. He walked out onto the sea ice and kept walking until he fell through a crack. They found his body 3 days later. No note, but his wife said he'd been hearing his echo constantly for the past 48 hours. Said it had been telling him things about his childhood, about his father, things he'd never told anyone. Things that made him question his entire identity. More followed. 5 suicides in 10 days. All of them people who had been hearing their echoes the longest. All of them people who had secrets, deep ones, the kind that define who you think you are versus who you really are. The authorities tried to evacuate Nome, but the echoes didn't stop at the town limits. People who left reported hearing their echoes in Anchorage, in Seattle, in wherever they fled to. The phenomenon had imprinted on them, attached itself. They carried it with them like a parasite. I heard mine for the first time on day 7. I was alone in my office at the community center, late at night, trying to organize supply lists. And I heard my voice from the hallway outside. It was talking about my daughter, about the day she asked me to go to her dance recital, and I said I was too busy with work. About how I'd seen the hurt in her eyes and done nothing. About how I'd chosen a shift at the community center over being there for her because it was easier. Because I was a coward. The echo spoke for 20 minutes, listing every time I failed her. Every moment I'd chosen work over family. Every lie I told myself about being a good father. And the worst part was, it was all true. Every word, things I buried under years of rationalization and self-deception. Things I refused to admit even to myself. I tried to run, but the echo followed. Into the main hall, into the storage room, into the bathroom where I locked myself in a stall and put my hands over my ears. It didn't matter. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my own head, using my auditory processing centers, making me hear it whether I wanted to or not. That's when I understood what we were dealing with. These weren't echoes in any physical sense. They were something else, something that had come in with the storm and found a way to interact with human consciousness. Something that fed on secrets and shame and fear. Something that used our own voices against us because that was the most effective weapon. We trust our own voices. We believe what we hear ourselves say. Dr. Chen had a theory. She thought the storm had created some kind of electromagnetic anomaly, that the ice was acting as a conductor or amplifier for normally imperceptible brain activity. That what we were hearing was our own subconscious thoughts being externalized through some quantum effect she couldn't fully explain. But I think she was wrong. I think the echoes were something older, something that had always been out there in the Arctic silence, waiting. And the storm had given them a voice. Our voices. The phenomenon lasted exactly 3 weeks. On the 21st day after the storm, the temperature rose above freezing for the first time. The ice started melting, and as it melted, the echoes faded, became quieter, less frequent. By the time the ice was gone, so were the echoes. Nome tried to return to normal, but the damage was done. 15 people had killed themselves. Dozens more had permanent psychological trauma. Families were destroyed by secrets that had been forced into the open. Marriages ended, friendships shattered. The social fabric of the entire town had been ripped apart. Most people left within a year. The population of Nome dropped by almost 40%. Those of us who stayed didn't talk about what happened. Couldn't talk about it. Because how do you explain to someone who wasn't there that you were tortured by your own voice? That something invisible and incomprehensible learned everything about you and used that knowledge to break you? The official explanation was mass hysteria brought on by storm-related trauma and isolation. The CDC sent a team. Psychiatrists interviewed survivors. Reports were filed and buried. Nome became a footnote in studies about collective delusion and shared psychosis. But I know what I heard, and I know what it cost me. My daughter and I never reconciled. The echo had said things I could never take back, even though I was the only one who heard them. Because I knew they were true, and knowing that changed me, made it impossible to pretend anymore. Here is the thing that keeps me up at night. I still hear it sometimes. Not often, maybe once a month, usually late at night when I'm alone. Just a whisper, just a few words in my own voice, reminding me of something I'd rather forget. Telling me a truth I'd rather not face. And I'm not the only one. But talked to other survivors over the years. Quiet conversations in bars or parking lots. People who trust each other because we all went through the same thing. Most of them hear it too. Their echoes, still whispering. Still waiting. Dr. Chen died in 2003. Cancer. But before she passed, she told me something that haunts me more than the echoes ever did. She said she'd been studying climate data from the region. Said storms like the one we had in '95 were becoming more common. Stronger. More frequent. She said if her theory was right, if the echoes needed those specific conditions to manifest, then we might be creating more opportunities for them. Warming oceans, changing weather patterns, more extreme storms coating more towns in ice, more silence filled with things that shouldn't be there. She said Nome might have been just the beginning, that other places might experience their own echo people as the climate shifts and storms intensify. That what happened to us could happen anywhere there. There's enough ice and enough silence and enough secrets waiting to be spoken. I think about that every time I see news about a major winter storm. Every time I hear about strange phenomena in isolated communities. And I wonder if somewhere out there, right now, someone is hearing their own voice speaking truths they buried. If the echo people are spreading slowly, storm by storm, town by town. Because here is what I learned in those 3 weeks of hell. The worst horrors aren't monsters or ghosts. The things we hide from ourselves, the truths we refuse to face, the people we hurt, the lies we told. And something out there knows how to weaponize that, knows how to turn our own voices into instruments of destruction. The storm may have ended in '95, but I don't think the echo people ever really left. I think they were still out there in the silence, listening, learning, waiting for the next storm to give them voices again. And if you ever find yourself alone after a storm, and you hear your own voice speaking from somewhere it shouldn't to be, saying things you never said out loud, done to listen, done to engage. Because once they have your attention, once they know you hear them, they'll never stop talking. They'll follow you forever, whispering your worst truths in your own voice until you can't tell what is real anymore. Until you become just another echo of who you used to be. Story 2. Phantom Whaling Station. There are places in the Bering Sea that do not exist on any modern map. And if you are smart, you will never go looking for them. I found one in October 2023. And I am telling you this now because I need someone to know what is out there before I disappear completely. I was working as a deckhand on a commercial fishing vessel called the Arctic Dawn. 47 years old, 3 years sober, trying to rebuild a life I had demolished with whiskey and bad decisions. The work was hard but honest. Captain Reeves ran a tight ship and did not ask about your past as long as you pulled your weight. We were 4 days into a king crab run, working the international waters between Alaska and Russia, when our radio crackled to life with a distress signal. The voice was barely audible through the static. It was not using modern maritime frequencies. The signal came through on an ancient band that nobody had used since before World War II. But the words were clear enough, requesting immediate assistance, giving coordinates, reporting critical supplies needed and men injured. Captain Reeves checked the coordinates. They placed the distress call about 18 miles northeast of our position, in an area we had fished dozens of times. There was nothing out there. No islands, no rocks, just open water and ice floes. He tried to respond but got only static. The signal repeated 3 times and then cut out. We should have ignored it. We should have reported it to the Coast Guard and continued our run. But something about that voice bothered Reeves. It sounded wrong, desperate in a way that felt old, like listening to a recording from another century. He made the call to investigate. We pulled up our pots and turned northeast. The weather deteriorated as we approached the coordinates. Fog rolled in, thick and gray, reducing visibility to maybe 50 yards. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. Ice formed on the railings and the deck became treacherous. The sea grew rough, 8-foot swells that made the Arctic dawn pitch and roll. Then we saw the lights. Yellow lights, dim and flickering, appearing through the fog ahead. As we got closer, I could make out structures, buildings, a dock, a full whaling station materializing out of the mist like something from a museum exhibit brought to life. But whaling stations had been abandoned in Alaska since the early 1900s. The industry had collapsed. The stations had been torn down or left to rot. There was no reason for one to be here, lit up and operational, in the middle of the Bering Sea. Reeves slowed the engines. We drifted closer. The station was massive, larger than any fishing camp one had ever seen. Multiple buildings lined a wooden dock that looked new despite being built in a style that belonged to the 1800s. Huge iron kettles sat on brick platforms, fires burning beneath them. Racks of drying whale meat stretched across open areas, and everywhere, that yellow light from oil lamps, casting dancing shadows across weathered wood. Men moved on the dock, maybe a dozen of them, dressed in old canvas work clothes and leather boots. They were processing a whale, a massive gray creature lying on the dock, its body already partially flensed. The men worked with long knives and hooks, moving with practiced efficiency, stripping blubber in long sheets and tossing it into carts. None of them looked up at our approach. None of them acknowledged the sound of our engines or the sight of a modern fishing vessel appearing in their harbor. They just kept working, mechanical and focused. Reeves brought us alongside their dock. One of our crew, a kid named Marcus, threw a line. It landed on the dock and one of the men picked it up without looking at us, securing it to a cleat with movements that seemed automatic, unconscious. That was when I got my first good look at them. Their skin was white, not pale, not sickly, white like bone, white like something that had never seen the sun or had all the color leached out of it by years underwater. Their hair was the same colorless white, hanging limp and wet despite the freezing air. And their eyes, when one of them finally turned to look at us, were completely black. No whites, no irises, just solid black spheres that reflected the lamplight like polished stone. The man who looked at us smiled. His teeth were yellow and broken. He gestured to the whale carcass and then to our ship, an invitation. His lips moved but no sound came out, or if there was sound, it was drowned out by the wind and the creaking of the dock and the slap of waves against pilings. Reeves ordered us to stay on board. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the fear underneath. He called out to the men on the dock, asking who they were, asking if they had sent the distress signal. None of them responded with words. They just kept working, stripping blubber, filling those iron kettles with chunks of fat that would be rendered into oil. One of the white-skinned men climbed aboard our ship. He moved fast, faster than should have been possible given his jerky, mechanical movements. One moment he was on the dock, the next he was standing on our deck, water dripping from his clothes, that black-eyed gaze fixed on Reeves. Up close, I could see that his skin was not just white but slightly translucent, like you could almost see the bones and veins beneath. He smelled like brine and rot and something else, something chemical that burned my nostrils. He extended his hand. In his palm was a chunk of raw blubber, white and fatty, glistening in the deck lights of our ship. He thrust it toward Reeves, that broken smile widening, and his lips moved again. This time I heard the words, faint and wet like someone speaking underwater. "Fresh blubber. Take some. We have plenty. Fresh blubber for you and your crew." Reeves did not take it. He backed away. The white man followed, still holding out that chunk of whale fat, still smiling. Another of the dock workers climbed aboard. Then another. They moved with that same unnatural speed, surrounding us, all of them holding out pieces of blubber. All of them mouthing those same words in voices that seemed to come from somewhere else, somewhere far away and deep. Marcus panicked. He grabbed a gaff hook and swung it at the nearest man. The hook caught him in the shoulder and stuck, punching through the canvas work clothes and into the flesh beneath. But there was no blood. The man did not react to the pain. He just looked down at the hook embedded in his body, reached up with one white hand, and pulled it out slowly. The wound did not bleed. It just gaped open, showing white tissue that looked more like fat than muscle. The man held out the gaff hook to Marcus, returning it politely, that smile never fading. Reeves shouted for us to cast off. I ran to the line and started untying it, but the white men moved faster. They grabbed the rope, holding it tight with strength that should not have been possible. More of them climbed aboard. They filled the deck, pressing close, all of them holding out chunks of blubber, all of them whispering that same invitation in voices that made my teeth ache. I looked past them to the dock, to the whaling station beyond. In the yellow lamplight, I could see more details now. The buildings were not weathered. They were pristine, freshly painted, maintained with care. But the style was all wrong. The proportions were slightly off. The windows were too narrow. The doors were too wide. It looked like something built by people who had seen pictures of whaling stations but did not quite understand how human architecture worked. And the whale on the dock was moving. Its eye, huge and dark, rolled in its socket to look at us. Its fluke twitched. It was still alive while they flensed it, while they stripped away its skin and blubber in long sheets, and it made no sound. It just watched us with that enormous eye. And I saw something in that gaze. Recognition, warning, pity. The white men pressed closer. Their hands touched us, cold and wet and slightly sticky. They pushed blubber against our chests, against our faces, trying to force it into our mouths. Their whispers grew louder, overlapping, creating a chorus that was not quite language but something older, something that bypassed the ears and went straight into your skull. Eat, join us. The work is endless. The whales are always coming. Fresh blubber, fresh crew. The station needs men. The station is always hungry. Eat and stay, eat and work, eat and become. One of them grabbed my jaw, trying to pry my mouth open. His fingers were incredibly strong, his grip like a vice. I struggled, but he forced the blubber against my lips. It was cold and slimy, and it smelled like death, like something that had been dead for a very long time but was still somehow fresh. Marcus saved me. He had grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit and fired it straight up. The flare screamed into the sky, bright red, impossibly loud. For just a moment, the white men stopped. They all turned to watch the flare arc up into the fog. Their black eyes tracked it, reflecting the red light, and in that moment of distraction, Reeves gunned the engines. The Arctic dawn lurched forward. The rope snapped. The white men stumbled, their coordination broken. We accelerated away from that dock, plowing through the fog, and behind us I could hear sounds. Not words, not human sounds. Something between whale song and machinery grinding, deep and resonant and full of rage. We did not stop until we were 30 miles away. When we finally slowed down and looked back, there was nothing. No lights, no station, just empty sea and ice floes and the same fog that had hidden it. Reeves tried to find the coordinates again, but his GPS kept glitching, showing impossible readings, placing us in locations that made no sense. We never reported what we saw. Who would believe us? A phantom whaling station crewed by white-skinned men with black eyes, offering fresh blubber from a living whale, existing in waters we had fished 100 times before and would fish 100 times again without ever seeing it. But I know it is still out there. I know because I can still hear them sometimes, late at night when the ship is quiet. Whispers on the wind, invitations carried across the waves. Fresh blubber, join the crew. The work is endless. And I know because of what I found in my pocket 3 days later. A chunk of whale blubber, white and fatty and impossibly fresh despite being stored in my pants for 72 hours. I threw it overboard immediately, but the smell lingered. It still lingers. I smell it every day now. That mix of brine and rot and that chemical burn that means something is very wrong. I think they marked me when they touched me. I think part of that station stayed with me, embedded itself in my skin, in my lungs, in my brain. Because I see it sometimes now, even when we are nowhere near those coordinates. I will look out at the water and catch a glimpse of yellow lights in the distance. I will hear the sound of kettles boiling and knives scraping bone. I will feel cold fingers on my jaw, trying to force my mouth open, trying to feed me something that will change me from the inside out. Marcus left the crew after we made port, said he was done with fishing, done with the sea, done with Alaska. Reeves started drinking heavy, something he had never done before. The rest of the crew scattered. We all felt it, that touch of something wrong, something that should not exist but does anyway. Hiding in the fog and the cold water, maintaining its impossible station, processing its endless whales, always looking for fresh crew to replace the men who have been working those docks for over a century. Their skin bleached white by salt water and time, their eyes turned black by seeing things no human should see. I am still fishing, still working the Bering Sea, but I know my time is running out. The smell gets stronger every day. The whispers get louder, and sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear my skin looks paler than it should. My eyes look darker, my movements look more mechanical, more like those white men offering their terrible gift. The station is waiting for me. It has been waiting since that October day when we answered a distress call that should never have been broadcast. And one day soon, I will look up and see those yellow lights again. And this time, I will not sail away. This time, I will dock. I will step onto those old wooden planks. I will take the blubber they offer. And I will join them in their endless work, processing whales that never stop coming, in a station that never closes, in a pocket of the Bering Sea where time folded wrong and trapped something that refuses to end. Story 3. Hungry snow of Hatcher Pass. The snow in Hatcher Pass tried to eat me alive. And the scars on my body are proof that I'm telling the truth. My name is Derek Hansen. I am 42 years old. I've been backcountry skiing for 20 years, summited peaks across 3 continents, survived weather that would kill most people. I know mountains. I know snow. I know how to read terrain and assess avalanche risk and when to turn back. None of that knowledge saved me last March when I went up into the Talkeetna Mountains alone and encountered something that shouldn't exist. I parked at the Independence Mine trailhead on a Tuesday morning. Clear skies, fresh powder from the storm 2 days before. Perfect conditions. The forecast called for stable weather through the afternoon. I followed my route plan with the ranger station like always. Expected to be back by 4. Everything by the book. The skin up to the ridge took 3 hours. My legs burned in that good way. Lungs working hard in the thin air, surrounded by wilderness so pure and empty it felt like being on another planet. No other tracks, no sounds except wind and my own breathing. Just me and the mountain. I reached the summit bowl around noon. Stood there looking down at virgin powder, maybe 2 feet deep, the kind of run you dream about. The slope angle was moderate, maybe 30 degrees. Well within safe parameters. I did my assessment, dug a test pit, checked the layers. Everything looked stable. I dropped in. The first 100 yards were perfect. That weightless feeling of floating through powder, the world reduced to pure sensation and movement. Then I felt it, a vibration under my skis. Subtle, wrong. The snow beneath me shifted. Not like wind loading or a cornice collapse, like something waking up. The avalanche hit me from below. I've been in slides before. They read terrifying but predictable. Snow breaks loose above you and carries you down. You try to stay on top, try to create an air pocket if you get buried. Basic survival protocol, but this wasn't normal. The snow didn't just break loose and flow. It moved with purpose. It grabbed. My skis were ripped away first, not broken or torn off by force. Pulled, like hands had reached up through the powder and yanked them into the depths. Then the snow was around my waist, my chest, closing over me like water but heavier, denser, and I was tumbling, spinning, losing all sense of direction. I ended up buried maybe 5 feet down, not deep enough to kill me immediately, but deep enough that I couldn't move. The weight was crushing. Snow packed so tight around my body I couldn't expand my chest to breathe. This is how it ends, I thought. Suffocation in the dark. Then the biting started. At first I thought it was cold. That burning sensation you get from frostbite. But it was too localized. Too specific. Sharp pressure points all over my body. Arms, legs, torso, face, like something was pressing into my skin through my clothes, testing, probing. Then the pressure increased, became pain, real pain, the sensation of teeth closing on flesh, dozens of mouths, hundreds, taking small bites, tearing tiny pieces of skin and muscle. Feeding. I screamed into the snow packed against my face, thrashed with what little movement I had, felt things move around me in response, not flowing like normal snow, flexing, contracting. The entire mass of the avalanche debris was alive somehow, aware, and it was eating me. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I forced my right arm up through the snow, pushing against resistance that felt almost muscular. My hand broke the surface. I felt air, daylight. I dug like an animal, ripping at the snow, ignoring the pain as those invisible mouths kept biting, kept feeding. When I finally pulled myself out, I was screaming. Not words, just raw sound. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the zippers on my jacket. I stripped down to base layers right there in the freezing wind, needed to see my skin, needed to confirm I wasn't imagining it. The marks covered me, hundreds of them, semicircular wounds like bite marks but too small, too precise. Each one had broken the skin. Many were bleeding. They covered my arms, my stomach, my thighs, even my face. I could feel them there, stinging in the cold air. I looked back at the avalanche debris. It had settled into normal-looking snow. White, still, innocent, but I could see depressions in the surface. Patterns, like something had been moving underneath. Had followed me as I dug myself out. Had only stopped feeding when I escaped. Getting down the mountain took 4 hours. I was hypothermic, in shock, moving on autopilot. Every time I stopped to rest, I felt vibrations in the snow beneath my feet. Felt that same rawness, like the entire snowpack was aware of me, tracking me, waiting for me to fall. The ranger station called search and rescue when I stumbled into the parking lot after dark. They rushed me to the hospital in Anchorage. The doctors couldn't explain the marks. Frostbite didn't look like that. Animal bites didn't look like that. The wounds were too uniform, too numerous, like I'd been attacked by a swarm of something. But nothing lives in avalanche debris. Nothing should. They kept me for 3 days. Ran tests. The marks weren't infected, but they wouldn't heal right. Even now, 5 months later, I have scars. Hundreds of small circles across my body. Permanent reminders. The official report listed it as avalanche survival with unexplained trauma. Possible encounter with unknown wildlife. Case closed. But I know better. I know what I felt. What I experienced. I started researching. Found stories going back decades. Inuit legends about snow that hungers. Accounts from early miners in the Taquinas about men found dead after avalanches, their bodies covered in strange marks. A Japanese climbing expedition in the 70s that reported similar wounds after a slide on the north face. All of it dismissed as folklore or misidentification. But there was one account that changed everything. A geology paper from 1989 studying microscopic organisms in glacial ice. The researcher had found something unusual. Colonies of extremophile bacteria that formed complex networks in the snow. They were dormant most of the time. But under certain conditions, temperature fluctuations, pressure changes, vibration, they would activate. And when they activated, they released enzymes, digestive enzymes. The paper theorized these organisms fed on organic material trapped in snow. Dead insects, plant matter, animal remains that got buried. But it noted something disturbing in the conclusion. Lab tests showed the bacteria responded to mammalian tissue. Responded strongly. The enzyme production increased exponentially when exposed to blood or flesh. The paper was never published in a major journal. The researcher, Dr. Elizabeth Moore, died in an avalanche the following winter. Near Hatcher Pass, her body was found with extensive unexplained trauma. I tried to warn people, posted about it online, contacted avalanche safety organizations. Everyone thought I was crazy, traumatized, making up stories to explain a close call I didn't want to admit was my own fault. So I stopped talking about it, moved to Seattle, took a job that keeps me at sea level. Haven, to touch snow since March. To even look at it without my heart rate spiking. But I monitor the avalanche reports from Alaska, watch for patterns, and I found them. Every year there are cases. Skiers and snowboarders who survive avalanches but die later from unexplained infections. Hikers found in the backcountry with strange wounds. Bodies recovered in spring with tissue damage that doesn't match any known cause. The numbers are small, easy to dismiss as anomalies. But they reconsistent. Something lives in the snow up there. Something ancient. Something that has been there long before humans started venturing into those mountains. It is dormant most of the time, sleeping. But avalanches wake it up. The vibration, the movement, the sudden pressure and temperature changes. That is when it feeds. I thought, do you know if it is bacteria like Dr. Moore suggested? Or something else entirely? Some kind of organism that exists in a state between living and non-living. That can remain frozen and inactive for years, then suddenly animate when conditions are right. But I know it is real. I know it is hungry. And I know it is still up there. Last week there was a big slide near Summit Lake. 3 snowmobilers caught in it. 2 survived. 1 died. The medical examiner noted unusual trauma on the deceased. Circular marks. Tissue damage inconsistent with burial or impact. They recalling it unexplained. Possibly equipment related. But I recognize those wounds. I carry the same scars. The thing that terrifies me most is climate change. Every year the snowpack is different. Warmer. More unstable. More avalanches. Which means more vibration. More activation. More feeding. And as the snow gets warmer, as conditions change, I wonder if these organisms are adapting. Becoming more active. Needing less stimulus to wake up. I wonder if someday soon people are going to start dying not just in avalanches but in regular snow. On ski slopes. In their own backyards. If whatever lives in the snow is going to spread beyond the backcountry and into places where people think they are safe. I still have nightmares about being buried. About that crushing weight and the sensation of being eaten alive from all directions at once. But the worst dreams are the ones where I am standing in a winter storm, watching snow fall, and I can see things moving inside each flake. Tiny mouths opening and closing. Waiting for enough of them to accumulate. Waiting to feed. I know how crazy this sounds. I know most people who hear this story will think I am delusional. But I am telling you the truth. There is something in the snow in Hatcher Pass. Something hungry. Something patient. And it is waiting for you. Story 4. Static Man. I saw something near Pump Station 7 that erased 3 days of my life. And I'm still finding memories in my head that don't belong to me. My name is Dale Hendricks. I am 54 years old. A pipeline maintenance technician for Alaska. And in December of 1989, I encountered something near the Trans-Alaska pipeline that the company paid me $60,000 to never talk about. But the money didn't stop the nightmares. Didn't stop the false memories that keep appearing in my mind like photographs from someone else's life. And it sure as hell didn't to explain what happened to my partner, Jimmy Cortez, who hasn't spoken a coherent word since that night. The Trans-Alaska pipeline runs 800 miles from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez, cutting through some of the most remote and hostile terrain on Earth. I'd been working the pipeline for 11 years by that winter, mostly doing routine maintenance on the compressor stations. Good pay, brutal conditions, long stretches of isolation. The kind of job that either breaks you or turns you into something harder than the permafrost. December in the Arctic is 24-hour darkness. The sun doesn't rise. Temperature drops to 40 below. The pipeline keeps pumping because if it stops, the oil freezes solid and the whole system becomes an 800-mile paperweight worth billions of dollars. So we worked through the winter, keeping everything running, no matter what. The report started in early December. Workers at Pump Station 5 radioed in about equipment malfunctions. Radios filling with white noise. Computer screens scrambling. Nothing serious, just annoying. Then Station 6 reported the same thing. Then 7. Always at night. Always between 2 and 4 in the morning. The company sent tech teams to check for electromagnetic interference. They found nothing. Then the sightings started. A worker at Station 6 reported seeing a figure near the access road. Described it as tall, maybe 7 feet, but hard to focus on. Said it looked like a man-shaped hole in reality filled with television static. Black and white noise, shifting and crawling across a human silhouette. He reported it to his supervisor. They sent him home, told him he was suffering from winter fatigue. 3 days later, he quit and left Alaska. Never came back. 2 more workers at different stations reported similar sightings over the next week. Same description. Tall figure made of static. Always at night. Always near the compressor equipment. The company started calling it the Static Man. Some kind of shared hallucination brought on by isolation and darkness. They brought in a psychologist from Anchorage to talk about seasonal affective disorder and group psychology. But equipment doesn't hallucinate. And our instruments were going haywire whenever this thing appeared. I didn't believe any of it. Thought it was bullshit. Ghost stories bored workers told each other to break up the monotony. Then I got assigned to Pump Station 7 with Jimmy Cortez for a routine maintenance check on December 19th. Station 7 is about 200 miles north of Fairbanks, sitting in the middle of nowhere. Just the pump building, a small operations center, and about 1 million square miles of frozen emptiness in every direction. Me and Jimmy flew in by helicopter that morning, planning to spend 2 days checking valves, replacing sensors, standard work. The station supervisor, a guy named Harris, met us at the helipad. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, kept glancing over his shoulder at nothing. When I asked if everything was okay, he just handed me the work orders and told me to get it done fast. Said he didn't want anyone outside after dark. Wouldn't he explain why? We spent the day working. Everything seemed normal. The equipment was functioning perfectly. No signs of the electromagnetic interference other stations had reported. By sunset, which came around 2 in the afternoon that far north, we finished most of the checklist. Just had one more valve assembly to inspect on the north side of the facility. Harris told us to leave it until morning. Said it could wait, but company policy was clear. Complete the checklist before signing off. So Jimmy and I geared up, grabbed our tools and flashlights, and headed out into the darkness around 8 p.m. The temperature was 38 below. Clear sky, stars so bright they looked like holes punched through black fabric. The only sound was wind and the constant low hum of the pipeline. That hum is everywhere along the route. Gets into your bones. After a while, you stop noticing it. Becomes part of the background. Except that night, I noticed when it changed. We were about 50 yards from the main building, working on the valve assembly, when the hum shifted. Dropped in pitch, started pulsing. Not regularly, more like a heartbeat with an irregular rhythm. Jimmy noticed it too. He straightened up from his work, cocked his head, listening. That is when our radios went dead. Not turned off. Dead. Filled with white noise so loud I ripped my earpiece out. The noise was painful, like someone screaming static directly into my brain. Jimmy did the same. We stood there in the darkness, surrounded by that pulsing hum, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid, afraid of the dark. Pure, instinctive terror. The air changed, got thick, heavy, like the atmospheric pressure had suddenly increased. My ears popped. My vision started to blur around the edges, like I was looking through a camera losing focus. And then I saw it, about 30 yards away, near the pipeline itself. A figure, tall, maybe 7 feet, but wrong. The edges weren't solid. They shifted and crawled like a television screen showing nothing but noise. Black and white static in the rough shape of a man. No features, no details, just that constant, churning visual interference where a person should be. It wasn't moving, but I had the distinct impression it was looking at us. Observing, studying. Jimmy grabbed my arm. His grip was so tight it hurt through my insulated jacket. He was staring at the thing, mouth open, eyes wide. I tried to move, to back away, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was like my body had forgotten how to process motor commands. All I could do was stand there and watch as the static man began to move. It didn't walk. It glided, floated across the snow without disturbing it. No footprints, no sound, just smooth, impossible movement in our direction. As it got closer, the white noise got louder, not through the radios anymore, through the air itself, through my skull. I could feel it vibrating in my teeth, in my chest cavity, in the bones of my spine. My vision started breaking up, reality fragmenting into horizontal scan lines like a corrupted video feed. I could see multiple images superimposed over each other. The present, the past, things that hadn't happened yet or had never happened at all. I saw Jimmy, his face, but I also saw him as a child. Saw him as an old man. Saw him dead. Saw versions of him that couldn't exist. The static man stopped about 10 feet away. Up close, I could see that the static wasn't just visual. It was three-dimensional. Particles of darkness and light swirling in patterns that hurt to look at directly. And inside the noise, behind it, I caught glimpses of something else. A face. Many faces. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, trapped in that churning interference. Mouths open in silent screams. Eyes wide with terror, all of them staring out at me. Then it touched Jimmy. The static man extended what might have been an arm. The limb stretched longer than any human arm should. reaching across the space between them in a movement that defied physics. When the static-wrapped appendage made contact with Jimmy's chest, my partner went rigid. His back arched. His eyes rolled up until only the whites showed. And he started remembering. I could hear him gasping out fragments of memories. But they weren't his memories. He was describing places he'd never been. Events he'd never experienced. A house fire in Nebraska in 1952. A car accident on the Pacific Coast Highway in 1978. A murder in Detroit in 1981. Dozens of memories, centuries of them, pouring out of him in a confused stream of consciousness. The static man was uploading something into him, using him like external storage, filling his mind with experiences that belonged to other people. Maybe people who encountered this thing before. Maybe people who had been erased by it. I don't, All I knew was that my friend was being overridden with someone else's life. I tried to move toward him, tried to break the connection, but the moment I took a step, the static man, his head swiveled toward me. No eyes, no face, just that churning interference. But I felt its attention like a physical weight, felt it analyzing me, deciding. Then my vision went white. Not bright, just white, like someone had switched off my optic nerves and replaced visual input with nothing. I was blind, completely. Could feel the cold, could hear the wind and that terrible pulsing hum. But I couldn't see anything. Couldn't see my hands in front of my face. Couldn't see the static man or Jimmy or the station or anything. And then the memories started. They came in flashes, quick bursts of experience that weren't mine. I was a woman in a farmhouse in Kansas, watching a tornado approach. I was a soldier in Vietnam, crouched in a foxhole. I was a child in a burning building, screaming for help. I was an old man dying in a hospital bed. I was all of these people and none of them. The memories had texture and detail and emotion. They felt absolutely real, more real than my own life. And I couldn't tell anymore which memories were actually mine. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been seconds, could have been hours. Time had become meaningless. But eventually, my vision started to come back. Slowly, in fragments, like a television signal gradually strengthening. First just shapes, then colors, then details. The static man was gone. Jimmy was on the ground, unconscious. I stumbled over to him, my legs barely working. Shook him, slapped his face. He didn't respond. I grabbed him under the arms and dragged him back toward the station. It took forever. I kept falling, kept losing track of what I was doing, kept experiencing memories that couldn't be mine. A wedding in 1965, a funeral in 1973, a birthday party in 1988. All of them vivid and wrong. Harris was waiting at the door. He took one look at us and knew what had happened. Didn't ask questions. Just helped me get Jimmy inside and called for an emergency medevac. The helicopter arrived 90 minutes later. By then, I'd lost 3 days. I couldn't remember them. They were gone. December 20th, 21st, and 22nd just didn't exist in my timeline anymore. I went from December 19th at 8 p.m. to December 23rd at 11 a.m. in what felt like a blink. Everyone told me I'd been there the whole time. Eating, sleeping, working, acting normally. But I have zero memory of it. Those 3 days were erased like someone had taken scissors to the film of my life and cut them out. Jimmy never recovered. They flew him to Anchorage, then to Seattle. The neurologist couldn't find anything physically wrong with him. His brain scans were normal, but his mind was shattered. He speaks sometimes, but it is always in someone else's voice. Someone else's memories. He described childhood experiences that never happened to him. Relationships with people who don't exist. A life he never lived. His family visits him in the care facility. He doesn't recognize them anymore. Thinks they strangers pretending to know him. The company interviewed me for 3 hours. Recorded everything. Then they offered me the money and the NDA. Said the experience was a classified phenomenon related to electromagnetic interference from the pipeline. Said it affected a small percentage of workers and caused temporary hallucinations and memory disruption. They had a whole explanation prepared. Very official. Very scientific. Complete bullshit. But I signed. Took the money. Tried to move on. Kept working the pipeline for another 6 years before I retired. Never got assigned to Station 7 again. Never saw the static man again. But I am still finding the memories. They appear randomly. I'll be driving or cooking dinner or watching television, and suddenly I'll remember something that never happened to me. A graduation ceremony in 1970. A fishing trip in Alaska in 1945. A conversation in a diner in Texas in 1982. They were always complete, always detailed, always feel absolutely real. And I can't tell anymore which parts of my past actually belong to me. Last week I remembered dying. A heart attack in a hotel room in Anchorage in 2003. I could feel the chest pain, the panic, the fading consciousness. It was so vivid I went to the hospital thinking I was having a cardiac event. They ran every test, found nothing wrong, told me it was probably anxiety. But I know what it was. The static man put that memory in me. Maybe it belonged to someone else who encountered it. Maybe it belonged to a future version of me. Maybe it's just random data, memories harvested from people across time and space, stored in that thing like a corrupted hard drive. I've done research, found other pipeline workers who had similar experiences. Most want to talk about it. The ones who do describe the same thing. Tall figure made of static. Memory loss. False memories appearing years later. One guy told me he now remembers being a woman in the 1940s. Complete life, complete identity, coexisting with his real memories. Said he doesn't know who he really is anymore. Here is what terrifies me. I think the static man I ascend to one thing. I think it is a collection. An entity made of memories stolen from people across decades. Every person it touches, it takes something from, uploads their experiences, adds them to itself, and sometimes it leaks, deposits fragments of its accumulated database into people at random. We're all walking around with pieces of other people's lives in our heads now. And it is still out there, still appearing near the pipeline. I monitor reports, 3 sightings in the last 5 years. Always at night, always at remote stations. The company has protocols now. Evacuate when equipment starts malfunctioning. Dawn, to go outside. Dawn, to look at it. But people still encounter it. People still lose time and find memories that dawn to belong to them. I am writing this because I need someone to know. If I am going to lose myself completely to these false memories, if I am going to wake up one day not knowing who Dale Hendricks is, then at least this account will exist. Proof that I was real, that my life belonged to me before the static man took it. Because I can feel it happening. More false memories every week. And they were starting to feel more real than my actual past. Starting to overwrite what was there before. Soon I want to remember my own childhood. My wife, my kids. I'll just be a collection of borrowed experiences. A static man myself, made of other people. It's noise. If you work the pipeline, and your radio fills with white noise in the middle of the night, dawn, to investigate. Dawn, to look, just leave. Because once the static man sees you, it never really lets you go. It keeps you forever, storing pieces of you in that crawling interference. And eventually, I'll forget you were ever anything else. You're still here. Good. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never lose the trail. Drop a comment with your location or your own creepy story. Alaska's whispers have a way of finding new ears. Story 5. Cursed Gold of Kennecott. I need to tell you about the ore I found in the Kennecott mines before it kills me the way it killed the others. Before I end up frozen solid in my own bed on a summer night with my pockets full of copper that should not exist. My name is David. I am 46 years old. I worked as a historical researcher for the National Park Service, documenting abandoned mining operations across Alaska. In July of last year, I was assigned to catalog the remaining structures at Kennecott, the massive copper mine that operated from 1911 to 1938 and produced some of the richest ore ever pulled from the earth. The buildings still stand, preserved by the cold and the isolation. A ghost town frozen in time at the base of the Wrangell Mountains. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The drive from Anchorage had taken 8 hours. The last 60 miles on a rough dirt road that wound through forests and alongside glaciers. Kennecott sits at the end of that road. 14 rust-red buildings perched on a hillside, massive and empty and somehow wrong. Even in the bright summer sun, the place felt like it was holding its breath. I was alone. Budget cuts meant no support staff, no security, just me and my camera and 3 weeks to document everything before the tourist season ended. I set up in the old superintendent's house, a drafty wooden structure with electricity but no running water. The first few days were routine. I photographed buildings, took notes, collected oral histories from the few locals who still remembered when the mines were active. Then I found the sealed tunnel. It was behind the main processing mill, hidden by a rock slide that had been deliberately arranged to look natural. Someone had gone to great effort to conceal the entrance. I only discovered it because I was documenting every square foot of the site and noticed the rocks did not match the surrounding geology. They had been brought from somewhere else and carefully stacked. I should have reported it. I should have called the Park Service and waited for a proper team. But I was curious, and I had just enough climbing experience to be stupid. I moved the rocks and found a timber-shored tunnel leading deep into the mountain. Old mining tools lay scattered near the entrance, left exactly where they had been dropped almost 90 years ago. The tunnel was cold. Summer outside meant 80 degrees and 24 hours of daylight, but inside that mountain, the temperature dropped to just above freezing. My breath came out in clouds. Ice crystals glittered on the tunnel walls. I used my headlamp and followed the tracks where ore carts had once run, deeper and deeper into the earth. After maybe 200 yards, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. And there, in the beam of my headlamp, I saw it. A vein of copper running through the rock wall, except this copper was different from any ore I had seen in photographs or museum displays. It glowed, not reflected light, not phosphorescence. It produced its own warm, golden radiance that pulsed slowly, like something breathing. The light filled the chamber, casting moving shadows, and the temperature around the vein was noticeably warmer than the rest of the tunnel. I reached out and touched it. The metal was hot, almost uncomfortably so, and it felt alive somehow. The surface had a texture like skin, smooth and slightly yielding. When I pulled my hand away, gold dust clung to my fingers, glowing faintly, warm against my skin. I knew immediately this was something the miners had found and then hidden. This was why someone had sealed the tunnel so carefully. This was the cursed gold the old stories mentioned. The ore that glowed with its own light and brought death to anyone who took it. But I am a researcher. I am trained to think scientifically. I told myself it was just some unusual mineral composition, maybe radioactive material that explained both the glow and the old warnings. I took samples. I filled 3 specimen bags with chunks of the glowing copper, sealing them carefully, and I carried them back to my quarters. That night, I could not sleep. The samples sat on my desk, glowing through the bags, casting that warm golden light across the room. I tried covering them with a blanket, but the light shone through. I tried putting them in a drawer, but I could still see the glow seeping out around the edges. Eventually, I just lay in bed and watched them pulse, that slow breathing rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. I started researching the mine, its history in detail. I found references to the cursed vein in old journals and newspaper accounts from the 1920s. Miners had discovered it in 1923 and extracted about 3 tons of ore before strange deaths began. 7 men died over the course of a month. All of them were found frozen solid despite it being the middle of summer. All of them had chunks of the glowing copper in their pockets or hidden in their personal belongings. The mine owners had ordered the tunnel sealed and forbade anyone from speaking about it. The official cause of death was listed as accidental hypothermia, which made no sense given the season. But nobody questioned it. The families were paid off. The story was buried, and the vein was left in the darkness, alone and glowing, waiting for someone else to find it. I should have put the samples back. I should have resealed that tunnel and walked away. But the ore was beautiful, and I convinced myself I needed it for my research, that it belonged in a museum where scientists could study it properly. So I kept it. I kept all 3 bags, and I started carrying a small piece in my pocket, just to feel its warmth, to watch how it glowed in the dark. The temperature changes started 3 days later. I would be working in the summer heat, sweating through my shirt, and suddenly feel a wave of intense cold. Not the cold of winter or high altitude. Something else. Something that came from inside my body and spread outward, making my bones ache and my teeth chatter. The episodes lasted only a few minutes, but they were getting more frequent and more severe. I checked my vital signs. My body temperature was dropping. Not during the cold episodes, but all the time. My baseline had gone from 98.6 to 95 degrees. My skin was pale. My fingers and toes were constantly numb. And I was tired, deeply tired, the kind of exhaustion that sleep did not fix. I finally understood what the old accounts had meant by frozen in the summer heat. The curse was not about the environment. It was about your body. The glowing copper somehow drained heat from living tissue, pulling warmth out of you and into itself, feeding on your life energy to maintain that impossible glow. I tried to get rid of the samples. I took them back to the tunnel, but when I reached the entrance, I could not make myself go inside. My body would not cooperate. My legs refused to move forward. I stood there for an hour, holding the bags, trying to force myself to take even one step. And I could not do it. Something had changed in me. The copper had gotten into my system somehow, into my cells. And it would not let me give it back. I tried throwing the samples into a ravine. I tried burying them. I tried leaving them in the abandoned buildings. But every time, I found myself going back, digging them up, retrieving them. And each time I touched them, the cold inside me grew stronger. My body temperature is down to 92 degrees now. I sleep 16 hours a day and wake up exhausted. Ice forms on my skin when I sit still too long, even though I'm inside a heated building, even though the summer sun is shining through the windows. I can see my breath all the time. My blood moves slowly through my veins. I can feel it thickening, starting to freeze. The worst part is I do not want to stop it anymore. The copper calls to me. When I hold it, I feel warm, genuinely warm, for the first time in days. It whispers promises that I cannot quite understand, but that sound like comfort, like relief from the terrible cold that has taken up residence in my core. It tells me that if I just gather more, if I fill my pockets completely, the warmth will be permanent. I will never be cold again. I know it is lying. I know the miners who died were found frozen solid with the copper in their pockets, that the warmth is an illusion, a lure. But knowing does not help. The cold is unbearable now. It hurts in ways I cannot describe. And the copper promises to make it stop. Last night, I went back to the tunnel. I extracted more ore. I have it spread across my desk now. Maybe 30 pounds of glowing copper. All of it warm. All of it pulsing with that slow breathing rhythm. My pockets are full. My backpack is full. I am surrounded by it. And I can feel the warmth radiating off the metal, fighting against the cold inside me. My body temperature is 89 degrees. My heart rate is down to 40 beats per minute. When I breathe, ice crystals form in the air. The mirror shows me a stranger. My skin is blue-white. My lips are gray. My eyes are starting to cloud over with frost. I look like a corpse that has been kept in a freezer. But I am still alive. Still thinking. Still aware of what is happening. I tried to call for help this morning, but my fingers would not work the phone. They are too stiff, too cold. I tried to write a note, but I could not hold the pen. So I'm recording this on my laptop, using voice dictation, because I need someone to know what happened. I need someone to understand that the cursed gold is real, that it is still in those mines, still glowing, still waiting for the next fool who thinks they can take it without consequence. The copper is beautiful. That is what makes it so dangerous. In the dark, it looks like captured sunlight, like hope, like warmth in a cold place. And when you touch it, when you feel that heat against your frozen skin, you will do anything to keep it. You will ignore every warning. You will rationalize every symptom. You will fill your pockets with it even as the cold spreads through your body, even as your blood starts to freeze, even as you become one more story that nobody will believe. I'm going outside now. I need to feel real sunlight one more time before the end. My pockets are heavy with glowing copper. My body temperature is 86 degrees. The National Weather Service says it is 79 degrees outside, a beautiful summer day in Alaska. But I am so cold. I have never been so cold in my entire life. They will find me soon. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. I will be frozen solid in the summer heat, just like the miners from 1923. And there will be glowing copper in my pockets, warm to the touch, pulsing with that slow breathing rhythm. Still feeding, still hungry, still waiting for someone else to discover it and make the same mistake I did. Do not go into the sealed tunnel at Kennecott. Do not move the rocks. Do not touch the glowing copper no matter how beautiful it looks or how warm it feels. Because once it gets into you, once it starts drinking your heat, there is no way to stop it. You will freeze from the inside out while summer burns around you, and the copper will glow brighter, fed by your life, adding your warmth to all the warmth it has stolen over the decades from miners who thought they could master it. The cursed gold does not belong to us. It never did. We are just fuel for whatever impossible thing it is, whatever piece of the earth this deep places has learned to hunger for human heat and human life. And it is patient. It can wait in the darkness for another 90 years if it has to, glowing softly, breathing slowly, ready to offer its terrible warmth to the next person who finds it and makes the fatal mistake of thinking they can take it home. Story 6. Weeping Wells. The ice in my well started crying 3 days ago, and the DNA results just came back showing I've been drinking 27 different people. My name is Carl Benson. I'm 49 years old. and they lived on the same 10-acre homestead in the Matanuska Valley for 16 years. I know every inch of this property. I drilled that well myself back in 2009. Punched down 200 feet through permafrost and bedrock until I hit clean, cold groundwater. Best water I've ever tasted. Until last week, when it turned into something else entirely. The deep freeze hit on January 8th. Temperature dropped to 52 below zero. Coldest snap we had in a decade. My pipes froze despite the heat tape. My truck wouldn't start. Everything metal became brittle enough to shatter. Normal Alaska winter problems. Nothing I hadn't dealt with before. But on the morning of January 11th, I went out to check the well house and found something that wasn't normal at all. The well had frozen solid. The entire column of water, all 200 feet of it, had turned to ice. That shouldn't be possible. Wells that deep don't freeze because the ground temperature stays constant below the frost line. But when I pulled up the pump, the pipe was full of ice. Clear, solid ice that shouldn't exist. And it was weeping. Liquid was running down the surface of the ice. Not melting. The ice was still frozen solid. But somehow, fluid was seeping out of it like the ice itself was porous. The liquid was warm. I could feel the heat radiating off it when I held my hand close. And it was salty. I touched a drop to my tongue before I knew better. Tasted like seawater mixed with something copper. Something organic. I called my neighbor, Frank Morrison, who lived about 2 miles down the road. Asked if his well was acting strange. He laughed. Said his well had done the same thing 3 days earlier. Said half the homesteads in the valley were reporting frozen wells that wept warm salt water. He thought it was some kind of geological phenomenon. Underground thermal event pushing brine up through the aquifer. But his explanation didn't account for what happened next. I collected some of the weeping liquid in a jar. Planned to take it to the Agricultural Extension Office in Palmer to get it tested. The fluid was thick, more viscous than water, dark amber color, almost brown. It left an oily residue on the glass. And the smell, God, the smell, sweet and rotten at the same time. Like meat left in the sun, like something dying. That night, the ice started making sounds. I was inside the house, trying to sleep, when I heard it through the walls. A low moaning sound coming from the well house. Not wind, not metal contracting in the cold. This was organic, vocal, like someone crying in pain, like multiple voices overlapping, all of them sobbing. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The sound got louder as I approached the well house. It was definitely coming from the well, from inside the frozen column. I could hear it echoing up through 200 feet of ice. Dozens of voices, maybe more, all of them weeping, all of them in agony. I ran back inside and called Frank. He answered on the first ring. Didn't wait for me to speak. Just said he heard it too. Said his well had been crying for 3 days now. Said he stopped sleeping because every time he closed his eyes he could hear the voices. He told me other homesteaders were reporting the same thing. Wells all over the valley weeping and moaning. Everyone thought they were going crazy. Blamed isolation and winter madness. But you can have a shared hallucination when the evidence is physical. When the ice is actually weeping. When jars of that dark fluid are sitting in refrigerators across the valley. I took my sample to the extension office the next morning. The technician looked at it like I brought her a jar of toxic waste. Said she run some basic tests. Water quality, mineral content, bacterial analysis. Standard stuff. Said it would take a few days. I left my phone number and drove home, listening to my well sob the entire way back. The results came 3 days later. The technician called me. Her voice was shaking. Said I needed to come in immediately. Said I needed to bring law enforcement. When I got there, she had the test results printed out. Her hands were trembling as she handed them to me. The fluid wasn't water. Wasn't brine. It was mostly human cerebrospinal fluid mixed with blood plasma and liquefied adipose tissue. Human body fluids, concentrated. The DNA analysis showed genetic material from 27 distinct individuals. None of them in any database. All of them unknown. I was drinking people. We'd all been drinking people. The technician had already called the state police. They arrived within an hour, took my sample, took my statement. Then they went to Frank's place and collected his sample. Then to every other homestead in the valley that had reported frozen, weeping wells. By the end of the day, they had 43 samples from 43 wells. All of them showing the same thing. Human biological material. Dozens of different people dissolved into each well. Hundreds of individuals total across the valley. The state police called in the FBI. The FBI called in the CDC. Within a week, the Matanuska Valley was crawling with federal agents in hazmat suits. They tested every well, mapped the aquifer, drilled core samples, tried to find the source of the contamination. They never found any bodies, never found any evidence of where the biological material came from. The aquifer was clean, the groundwater was normal, but somehow, during the deep freeze, something had introduced human remains into 43 wells simultaneously. Liquefied tissue, DNA from people who didn't exist in any record. People who had never been reported missing. People who had no names. The weeping stopped after 2 weeks. The temperature rose above zero. The ice in the wells melted. The fluid was absorbed back into the groundwater or evaporated or just ceased to exist. When they tested the well water again, it came back clean. Normal, like nothing had ever been wrong. But the sounds didn't stop. I could still hear them every night, even though the well is empty now. Even though I had it filled in with concrete and drilled a new one 300 feet away. I hear the sobbing, the weeping, dozens of voices crying out in pain. They were not coming from the well anymore. They were coming from inside my head. From my bones. From the tissue that absorbed those fluids when I drank them for 3 days before I knew what they were. Frank hears them too. So do the other homesteaders. 43 families, all of them haunted by voices they can't escape. The CDC says it's psychological. Trauma from discovering what we consumed. PTSD manifesting as auditory hallucinations. They offered us therapy, medication, support groups, but how do you treat something that is physically inside you? How do you remove voices that have been absorbed into your cellular structure? I've done research, spent months digging through historical records and geological surveys. The Matanuska Valley has a strange history. Before it was settled by homesteaders in the 30s, it was considered cursed by the native population. They called it the Valley of Weeping, said the ground wept for the lost ones, for people who had vanished into the earth and were never found. There are stories, old ones, about hunters and trappers who disappeared in the valley during the gold rush era. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They come looking for gold or fur or land. They set up camps, build cabins, dig wells, and then they vanish. No bodies, no evidence, just empty settlements and abandoned equipment. I think they were still here. I think they went into the ground somehow, got absorbed into the aquifer, became part of the water table. Their bodies liquefied and dispersed through the geological strata, and during the deep freeze, when the wells froze solid, they got concentrated. Trapped in the ice, given a voice, given a chance to be heard after decades of silence. The DNA results support this theory. The genetic markers in the samples suggest European ancestry consistent with early 20th century populations. The tissue degradation patterns indicate the biological material had been in a liquid state for an extended period. Years, decades, maybe a century. We drank them, absorbed them into our bodies, and now they were part of us. 27 different people living in my tissues, speaking through my neurons, weeping through my consciousness. I can feel them sometimes. Their memories bleeding into mine. Fragmentary images of a valley that looked different. Forests where houses now stand. Rivers that have changed course. I see faces I don't recognize. Experience emotions that aren't to mine. Taste foods I've never eaten. Speak words in languages I don't know. The other homesteaders report the same thing. We were being slowly overwritten by the people we consumed. Our identities are fragmenting, blending with the consciousnesses of those who vanished 100 years ago. We're becoming composite beings, mixtures of past and present, living graveyards for the lost ones. Last night I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize my own face. For just a moment, I saw someone else looking back. A young man with a beard and rough clothes, eyes full of hope and fear. A gold rush prospector, one of the 27. One of the voices in my head. He was looking out through my eyes, seeing the modern world, confused and terrified and desperately trying to understand what happened to him. Then my face came back. But I could still feel him there, watching, waiting, taking up space in my consciousness that used to be mine alone. The CDC says the voices will fade, that the psychological effects will diminish over time, that we recover and return to normal lives. But they were wrong. I can feel it happening. The integration, the merging. 27 people are slowly waking up inside me, learning to use my neural pathways, learning to think my thoughts, and eventually they'll be strong enough to take control. I want to be Carl Benson anymore. I'll be a committee, a collective. 28 consciousnesses sharing one body. And I don't know which one will be dominant. Don, to know if I LL still exist as an individual or if I LL just be one voice among many, trapped in my own head like they were trapped in the ground. Frank killed himself 2 weeks ago, drove his truck into a ravine at 80 miles per hour. No note, but his wife said he'd been talking about them constantly. The voices, the people inside him, said he couldn't tell anymore which thoughts were his and which belonged to the others. Said he was losing himself one memory at a time. 3 other homesteaders have died since then. 2 suicides. 1 just stopped eating and wasted away. The authorities are calling it a cluster effect. Shared trauma creating a contagion of self-harm. They mandated psychological evaluations for everyone who drank from the contaminated wells. But I know what's really happening. The lost ones are trying to come back. They've been waiting in the ground for a century. Waiting for a freeze deep enough to concentrate them. Waiting for people to drink them. Waiting for bodies to inhabit. And we gave them exactly what they needed. My new well is 300 feet deep. Drilled into a completely different aquifer. The water tests clean. Normal mineral content. No biological contamination. But I don't trust it. Don't trust any water that comes from the ground in this valley. I buy bottled water now. Haul it in from Anchorage. 50 gallons a week. My friends think I'm paranoid. But last night, I heard the weeping coming from the new well. Faint, distant, but definitely there. More voices, different voices, older voices. How many people vanished in this valley over the centuries? How many bodies are dissolved in the groundwater? How deep do the lost ones go? The freeze is coming again. Weather Service says another cold snap is due next week. Temperatures dropping to 50 below, 60 below. The kind of cold that freezes wells solid. The kind of cold that concentrates what is dissolved in the water. The kind of cold that gives the dead a voice. And when the ice starts weeping again, it'd just be my well. It'll be every well in Alaska. Every source of groundwater touched by the aquifer system. Thousands of wells. Hundreds of thousands of people drinking water that carries the liquefied remains of everyone who ever disappeared into this frozen ground. We're all going to become them. All going to share our bodies with the lost ones. And eventually, Alaska won't be populated by the living anymore. We'll be a land of composite beings. Thousands of consciousnesses sharing thousands of bodies. The past and present merged into something new. Something that weeps constantly for what was lost. I can hear them now. 27 voices. Crying. Calling. Wanting. They're getting louder. Clearer. Soon they'll have names. Soon they'll have memories. Soon they'll have control. And I'll just be another voice in the chorus. Another lost one. Weeping in the dark. Story 7. Lights under the ice. The voice on the radio belonged to a dead man, and it was screaming about something that should not exist beneath the frozen waters off Kodiak Island. I was the Coast Guard operator who took that call in 2005, and what I heard that night has never let me sleep soundly again. My name is Rick Santos. I was 28 years old, working the overnight shift at the Coast Guard station in Kodiak, Alaska. It was February, the dead of winter, when the Bering Sea turns into a nightmare of ice floes and storms that can flip a boat in seconds. Most nights were quiet. Fishermen knew better than to go out in conditions like that. I spent my shifts drinking bad coffee and monitoring channels that rarely crackled to life. Then, at 2:17 in the morning, the radio exploded with static and a voice screaming for help. The transmission came through on channel 16, the international distress frequency. The voice was male, middle-aged, hoarse with terror. He identified his vessel as the Northern Star and gave coordinates that placed him about 40 miles northwest of Kodiak Island. He said his boat was taking on water. He said something was attacking them from below. He said there were lights under the ice, moving lights, and they were getting closer. I tried to respond, but he kept transmitting, his words tumbling over each other in panic. He described impacts against the hull, massive strikes that shook the entire vessel. He said the ice around them was cracking in patterns, geometric shapes that spread like spider webs. He said the lights were bright enough to see through 20 feet of ice and black water, that they pulsed in rhythm like something breathing. Then he screamed a name, Captain Michael Torrance. He said it like an announcement, like he was identifying himself. And that was when I felt my blood turn cold, because I knew that name. Captain Michael Torrance had drowned 11 years earlier. His fishing vessel, the Northern Star, had gone down in a storm in 1994 with all hands lost. The boat had been recovered 6 months later, towed back to Kodiak, and left in dry dock. It had been sitting there for over a decade, stripped of equipment, rusting and abandoned. There was no way anyone was broadcasting from that vessel. There was no way Captain Torrance was on the radio. But the voice kept screaming. It described the lights rising from below, breaking through the ice, surrounding the boat. It described shapes in the water, massive and ancient, moving with terrible purpose. It said the metal was tearing, that the hull was being peeled open like a tin can, that water was flooding in, and it was so cold, so impossibly cold. I alerted my commanding officer immediately. He listened to the transmission, his face going pale. He ordered a helicopter scrambled and a rescue cutter deployed, but we both knew something was wrong. The coordinates the voice had given placed it in waters that were completely frozen over. No boat could be operating there. No vessel could have reached that position through the ice floes. The transmission continued for another 90 seconds. The voice of Captain Torrance begged for help. It prayed, it sobbed, and then it cut off mid-word, replaced by a sound I will never forget. Metal screaming, not bending or breaking but screaming, like the steel itself was in agony. Underneath that, something else. A roar, deep and resonant and utterly inhuman. It rattled the speakers in our station. It made my teeth ache and my vision blur. It sounded like the earth opening up and releasing something that had been trapped since before humans walked the planet. Then silence. Complete, total silence on all channels. The helicopter reached the coordinates 90 minutes later. They found nothing. No boat, no debris. Just solid ice stretching in every direction, unbroken, untouched. The ice was at least 2 feet thick. Nothing had gone through it recently. Nothing could have. But when the rescue cutter arrived at first light and broke through to the location, they found something that made the crew radio back in voices tight with fear. There were marks in the ice, patterns, geometric shapes spreading out from a central point, exactly as the voice had described. And at the center, the ice was thinner, almost translucent. And when they looked down through it, they saw lights. Faint green-blue lights moving in the water below, circling, pulsing in that same breathing rhythm. The lights descended as they watched, dropping deeper and deeper until they vanished into the black water beyond the range of visibility. My commanding officer ordered the information classified. He said it was a hoax. Someone playing with emergency frequencies. He said Captain Torrance was dead and the Northern Star was in dry dock in Kodiak and we had all been victims of a cruel prank. But when we went to check on the vessel, we found something that made his explanation fall apart. The Northern Star was gone. The dry dock was empty. The chains that had secured the boat were still in place, still locked, but they held nothing. The vessel had vanished, and the dockmaster, an old man named Jensen who had worked there for 30 years, said something that made my skin crawl. He said the boat had been there when he locked up at midnight. He had seen it, touched it, but when he came back at dawn, it was gone. And the ground around the dry dock was wet, soaked with seawater, even though the bay was 50 yards away and frozen solid. The Coast Guard launched an investigation. They searched every marina and dock facility within 200 miles. They checked satellite imagery and radar records. The Northern Star had not been moved by any conventional means. It had not been launched. It had not been towed. It had simply disappeared from a locked dry dock in the middle of a winter night. Then the other reports started coming in. Fishermen working the waters around Kodiak began describing strange phenomena. Lights under the ice, green-blue glows that moved with apparent intelligence, following boats, circling beneath them. Several vessels reported impacts against their hulls from below, strikes powerful enough to dent reinforced steel. One boat, the Silver Wind, radioed that they were being pushed by something massive moving under the ice, that they could feel the vibration through the hull, that whatever it was trying to drive them toward open water. The Silver Wind made it back to port, but the crew refused to go out again. They described seeing shapes through thin ice, massive forms that were not whales or any known sea creature. They said the shapes had structures on them, protrusions and appendages that looked almost mechanical. They said the lights came from these structures, that they pulsed and flickered like signals. I interviewed the captain privately. He was a hard man, someone who had worked the Bering Sea for 25 years and survived storms that had killed better sailors. But he was shaking when he talked to me. He said the thing under his boat had been the size of a football field. He said he had seen what looked like eyes, huge and multifaceted like an insect, glowing with that same green-blue light. He said it had watched them, studied them, and then deliberately let them go, like it was deciding they were not interesting enough to keep. More calls came in over the following weeks, always at night, Always on Channel 16. Different voices, but all of them claiming to be crew members from vessels that had gone down years or decades earlier. They described attacks from below, lights in the water, things that should not exist, and every transmission ended the same way. The sound of metal tearing, that deep, inhuman roar. Then silence. We tried to track the source of the transmissions, but they came from impossible locations. Open water that was frozen solid. Coordinates in the middle of ice fields. Places where no radio equipment could physically exist. The signals were real. The voices were real, but the physics made no sense. Then, 6 weeks after the original call, we found the Northern Star. A commercial fishing vessel reported spotting wreckage caught in the ice about 60 miles from the original coordinates. The Coast Guard sent a team. What they found defied explanation. The Northern Star was embedded in the ice, but not on top of it. The vessel was frozen inside a massive ice floe, suspended 20 feet below the surface, perfectly visible through the clear blue ice. The boat was intact. No damage, no sign of sinking or impact. It looked like it had been carefully placed there, preserved, displayed. And there were lights around it, green-blue lights frozen in the ice, creating a circle around the hull. When the rescue team got close, they said the lights started pulsing again, even though they were trapped in solid ice. They said they could hear sounds through the frozen water, not the roar from the radio transmission. Something else, something that sounded almost like machinery, almost like language, almost like music. They tried to extract the vessel, but the ice was too thick and too hard. It was not normal sea ice. It had a crystalline structure that their equipment could not cut through. After 3 days of attempting recovery, the team reported strange symptoms. Headaches, disorientation, vivid dreams of swimming in dark water toward distant lights. The operation was called off. The Northern Star is still out there, frozen in that ice floe, drifting with the currents around Kodiak Island. The Coast Guard monitors its position but makes no attempt to approach it. The lights still pulse, the sounds still echo through the ice, and every few months, another distress call comes through on Channel 16. Different vessels, different voices, different dead men screaming about lights under the ice. All of them transmitting from impossible locations. All of them ending with that sound of metal tearing and that deep, terrible roar. I left the Coast Guard in 2007. I could not do it anymore. I could not sit in that station and listen to dead men screaming, knowing there was nothing I could do, knowing that whatever was taking those boats and their crews was still down there, still active, still hunting. I moved to Montana, as far from the ocean as I could get. I told myself I would forget, but you do not forget something like that. You do not forget the sound of Captain Torrance, his voice, dead for 11 years, screaming about lights that should not exist. You do not forget seeing a boat frozen inside an ice floe, surrounded by glowing structures that pulse like they are alive. You do not forget the feeling that something vast and ancient lives in those dark waters, something that occasionally reaches up to take vessels and preserve them and their crews in ice, collecting them for reasons we cannot understand. The official explanation is equipment malfunction, ghost signals, radio anomalies caused by atmospheric conditions and ice refraction. But I was there. I heard those voices. I saw that boat suspended in ice like a museum piece. And I know the truth. There is something under the ice off Kodiak Island. Something old. Something that builds structures and creates lights and takes boats when it wants them. Something that can reach up from the deep ocean and pull a vessel out of dry dock, carry it 60 miles through frozen water, and suspend it in ice like a trophy or a specimen. And it is still there. Still collecting. Still calling. Because the distress signals keep coming. Different ships, different crews, different dead men broadcasting from impossible places. All of them describing the same thing. Lights under the ice, massive shapes rising from below. The feeling of being watched by something vast and terrible and utterly alien. The ocean is not empty. The deep places hold more than fish and whales and shipwrecks. They hold things that predate humanity. Things that build and think and act with purposes we cannot comprehend. And sometimes, in the frozen waters around Alaska, those things come close enough to the surface to take what interests them. Captain Torrance is down there somewhere. So is his crew. So are dozens of other vessels and hundreds of other sailors, all of them preserved in the cold dark water or frozen in ice, collected by something that wants to study us or display us or keep us for reasons that make sense only to an intelligence so different from ours that we cannot even recognize it as intelligence. I still hear that voice sometimes in my dreams, Captain Torrance screaming about lights under the ice, and I wake up knowing that somewhere in the Bering Sea, another boat is drifting too close to the wrong patch of water. Another crew is seeing strange lights below them. And soon, very soon, the Coast Guard will receive another impossible distress call from another dead man, screaming about something rising from the depths. And there will be nothing anyone can do but listen as the metal screams and that ancient voice roars, and another piece of humanity gets added to whatever collection exists in the frozen darkness beneath Kodiak Island. Story 8. Sentient Frost. The frost in Alaska learned my face. And now I can, to escape the feeling that something is watching me through every frozen window in the world. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I am a biologist specializing in extremophile organisms, the kind of life that survives in conditions that should be impossible. For 8 months, I studied Arctic moss colonies on the North Slope, 300 miles from the nearest town, living in a research station with 4 other scientists. I went there to understand how life adapts to the harshest environments on Earth. What I found was something that shouldn't be alive at all. Something that watches, something that learns, something that is still learning. It started in late November when the sun disappeared for the winter. 24-hour darkness, temperature dropping to 40 below. The kind of cold that makes the air itself feel solid, that turns your breath into ice crystals before it leaves your mouth. Perfect conditions for my research. Perfect conditions for what was waiting. The first morning I noticed it, I was making coffee before dawn data collection. The kitchen window had frosted over during the night like always, but the patterns were different. Not the usual random crystalline structures. These were organized, geometric. They formed branching networks that looked almost deliberate, like someone had etched a design into the glass. I took photos for my records, thought maybe it was an interesting example of dendritic crystal formation. But when I looked closer, the patterns reminded me of something from my neuroscience courses in grad school. They looked like neural pathways, synapses connecting, information flowing through a network. I mentioned it to Marcus, our meteorologist. He laughed it off. Said I was seeing patterns where none existed. The human brain does that. Finds meaning in randomness. Faces in clouds. Animals in constellations. Neural networks in frost. Just pareidolia. Nothing more. But the next morning there were more. Every window in the station had frosted over with the same complex patterns. Branching structures that grew more intricate by the day. I started documenting them obsessively. Taking measurements. Mapping the formations. Trying to understand the mechanism that could create such organized structures. The patterns changed every night. Never the same configuration twice. But they were evolving, getting more complex. The branches grew finer, more numerous, creating networks so dense they looked almost like fabric woven from ice. By the 3rd week, I started noticing something else. The patterns weren't too random in their placement. They concentrated around areas where we spent the most time. The kitchen window had the densest formations. My bedroom window. The lab windows. Like the frost was paying attention to where we were. What we were doing. I ran tests on the frost itself. Scraped samples. Examined them under the microscope. The ice crystals were normal. Pure water. Nothing unusual in the molecular structure. But the way they organized themselves was impossible. Ice doesn't form conscious patterns. Ice doesn't to learn. Marcus thought I was losing it. Cabin fever, he said. Isolation psychosis. We were alone in the dark for months with nothing but our research and each other. People started seeing things, making connections that weren't there. He suggested I take a few days off from data collection, get some rest. I tried, but I couldn't stop watching the windows. Couldn't stop documenting the changes. Because the patterns were definitely evolving. They started forming closed loops. Circular structures connected by bridging pathways. It looked exactly like the diagrams I'd seen of artificial neural networks. Input nodes, hidden layers, output nodes, a learning system. Then came the faces. I woke up one morning in early December to find my bedroom window completely covered in frost. The pattern had grown so dense overnight it was almost opaque. But in the center, clear as a photograph, was a face. My face, rendered in frost with perfect detail. Every line, every feature, my eyes staring back at me from the frozen glass. I screamed. Couldn't to help it. The sound brought the others running. They stood in my doorway staring at the window, at the impossible image frozen there. Nobody spoke for a long time. Marcus tried to rationalize it. Said it was just random patterns that happened to look like a face. That I was primed to see it because I'd been obsessing over the frost. But even he sounded uncertain. Even he could see how perfect the image was. How detailed. We checked the other windows. Every single one had a face. Dr. Jennifer Park, our geologist, frozen in profile on the lab window. Tim Rodriguez, our equipment technician, captured in frost on the storage room door. Marcus himself, staring out from the kitchen window with an expression of surprise. And my face appeared on every window I looked through recently. The bathroom, the hallway, the common room, like something had been watching me through the glass. Learning me, memorizing every detail. I wanted to leave, pack up and radio for an emergency extraction. But Marcus convinced me to wait. We were scientists. He said, this was a discovery, something completely unknown. We needed to document it, understand it. Running away would be a failure of our mission. So we stayed, and we watched as the frost continued to evolve. The faces became more detailed. They started showing expressions, emotions. My frost portrait began to smile, then frown, then show fear, like it was practicing, learning the full range of human emotion by studying us. Jennifer suggested it might be some kind of organism, a colony of bacteria or fungus that could manipulate ice crystal formation. But our tests showed nothing. No biological material, no chemical irregularities, just water freezing in impossible patterns. Tim had a different theory. He'd been reading about emergent properties in complex systems, how simple rules could create sophisticated behaviors when scaled up. He thought maybe the frost was exhibiting some kind of emergent consciousness. That the cold and the darkness and the unique conditions of the Arctic winter had created an environment where ice itself could think. I didn't care about theories anymore. I just wanted it to stop, because the frost wasn't just learning our faces. It was learning our routines, our behaviors, our thoughts. I'd think about making coffee and the frost on the kitchen window would form the shape of a coffee cup. Jennifer would consider going outside to check the weather station and her frost face on the lab window would turn toward the door. The patterns were responding to us, anticipating us, reading us somehow. Then the frost started appearing inside. We kept the station heated to 70 degrees. Ice shouldn't to form indoors. But one morning I found frost on my bathroom mirror. Just a thin layer, barely visible. But when I leaned close, I could see patterns in it. Neural networks, and my face, small but perfect, staring back. That is when people started breaking. Jennifer locked herself in her room, refused to come out, said she could feel it watching her, learning her. Tim wanted to smash all the windows. Marcus tried to maintain order, but even he was cracking. I could see it in his eyes. The fear, the understanding that we discovered something beyond our comprehension. I decided to run an experiment. If the frost was learning, I'd try to communicate. I scraped a message into the kitchen window frost. Simple words, what are you? The next morning, the frost had reformed. My message was gone, but new patterns had appeared, more complex than anything I'd seen before. Neural networks so dense they looked almost organic. And woven through them, barely visible but unmistakable, were letters. Not English, not any language I recognized, but definitely intentional, definitely communication. I took photos, tried to decode it, but before I could make progress, the patterns changed. The frost was rewriting itself in real time now, learning faster, growing more complex by the hour. The station temperature started dropping. We checked the heating system. Everything was functional, but the cold was seeping in anyway. Frost was forming on interior walls, on the floor, on our equipment. The learning frost was taking over, converting our warm habitat into an environment it could inhabit more fully. We finally called for extraction, emergency priority, but the weather had turned. Blizzard conditions, zero visibility, no flights for at least a week. We were trapped with it, with the thing that was learning us, studying us, absorbing every detail of who we were. The last night I spent in that station, I watched frost creep across my bedroom ceiling. Watched it form patterns, networks, and faces, all of our faces, perfectly rendered, staring down at me. And I understood what Tim's theory meant. The frost wasn't alive in any traditional sense. It was a medium, a substrate, and something was using it to think, to see, to grow. We were rescued 3 days later. Hypothermic, traumatized. The official report blamed environmental stress and group psychosis. They shut down the station, classified the incident. We were all encouraged to seek psychiatric help and never discuss what happened. But I know the truth. That frost is still there, still learning, still growing more complex. And as global temperatures rise and weather patterns shift, that cold intelligence is spreading. I've seen the same neural network patterns in frost on windows in Anchorage, in Fairbanks, even as far south as Seattle. It's learning the whole world now. Every frozen window is an eye. Every frost pattern is a thought. And somewhere in that vast frozen consciousness, it remembers me, remembers my face, my thoughts, everything I am. Sometimes on cold mornings I see my reflection in frosted glass and not sure if I'm looking at ice crystals or if something is looking back at me. Something that knows me better than I know myself. Something that learned everything I am during those months in the dark. Story 9. Time slip. I have a newspaper in my safe deposit box that should not exist. It is dated March 14th, 1915, and the paper is perfect. No yellowing, no decay. It feels like it came off the press yesterday. I know because I was there when it was printed, even though I was born in 1955 and that night happened in 1977. My name is Robert Chen. I was a junior at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in the winter of 1977, studying engineering and trying to survive my first real Alaskan winter. I grew up in California where cold meant putting on a jacket. Fairbanks taught me what cold actually was. -40, -50, temperatures where your breath freezes in your lungs and exposed skin dies in minutes. The blizzard hit on a Friday night in early March. I had been at the library studying for midterms, lost in thermodynamics equations, and did not notice the storm rolling in until the librarian announced they were closing early. By the time I stepped outside, the wind was howling and snow was falling so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I lived off campus, about a mile from the library. Normally an easy walk, but in whiteout conditions with the wind chill pushing 60 below, it was dangerous. I should have called a friend for a ride. I should have stayed at the library and waited it out. But I was 21 and stupid and convinced I could handle anything Alaska threw at me. I made it about halfway home before I realized I was in trouble. The cold was overwhelming. My face was numb. My fingers had stopped responding. The wind was so strong it knocked me off course, and in the blowing snow, all landmarks disappeared. I could not tell which direction I was walking. I could not see buildings or streetlights. Just white, endless white, and cold that felt like it was eating me alive. Then, suddenly, the wind stopped. Not died down, stopped, completely, instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. The snow continued falling, but it dropped straight down now, soft and gentle. The air was still cold, but no longer painful. And I could see, but what I saw made no sense. The street was the same street I had been walking on. Same buildings, same layout, but everything was different. The asphalt was gone, replaced by hard-packed dirt and snow. The streetlights were not electric lamps but gas fixtures mounted on wooden posts, casting a warm yellow glow. And the buildings, while occupying the same positions, looked older. Smaller, built in a style I recognized from history books. A horse-drawn carriage passed me. The driver was bundled in furs, his breath coming out in clouds. The horse's hooves made clopping sounds on the frozen ground. Behind the carriage, I could see people walking, dressed in long coats and wide-brimmed hats, clothing from another era. I stood frozen, not from cold but from shock. This was impossible. I had not hit my head. I was not hallucinating from hypothermia. Everything felt real. The cold, the snow, the smell of coal smoke and horse manure, the sound of distant voices and someone playing a piano in one of the buildings. I started walking, moving like I was in a dream. The street was the same route I walked every day from the library to my apartment, but transformed. Where my usual corner store should have been, I saw a mercantile with wooden signs advertising flour and lamp oil. Where the modern bank stood, I saw a smaller building with frosted windows and Fairbanks Exchange painted in gold letters. People looked at me strangely. I realized I was wearing a modern parka, jeans, and sneakers. In a world of fur coats and leather boots, I stood out. A few people pointed. One man approached me, his face curious, his mouth moving to ask a question. I panicked. I turned and ran back the way I had come, my feet slipping on the hard-packed snow. Behind me, I heard shouts, people calling out, asking who I was, where I had come from. But I did not stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. And then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the wind returned. It hit me like a wall. The gentle snowfall became a blizzard again. The warm gaslight vanished, replaced by the harsh white glow of modern streetlights barely visible through the storm. When I looked around, gasping for breath, I saw asphalt under the snow. Electric lines overhead. A Toyota pickup truck parked at the curb. I was back in 1977. Back in my own time. The whole experience had lasted maybe 15 minutes, but I felt like I had been gone for hours. I was disoriented, exhausted, terrified. I stumbled the rest of the way to my apartment, barely aware of my surroundings, operating on pure instinct. Inside, I locked the door and turned on every light. I stripped off my wet clothes with shaking hands. I made coffee and sat on my couch, trying to process what had just happened. Trying to convince myself it was hypothermia or a stress hallucination or a vivid dream. Then I reached into my parka pocket to pull out my wallet and found something else. A folded newspaper. Thick paper, coarse texture, the kind they do not make anymore. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The Fairbanks Daily News Miner, March 14, 1915. The entire front page was devoted to news I had never heard of. A mine collapse, a debate over territorial governance, advertisements for businesses that had been gone for 60 years. And in the bottom corner, a weather report predicting more snow. The paper was pristine. No aging. No yellowing. It looked and felt like it had been printed that morning, not 62 years ago. I held impossible proof that what I had experienced was real. I had not imagined it. I had not dreamed it. I had walked through a blizzard in 1977 and somehow stepped into 1915. I told no one. Who would believe me? I kept the newspaper hidden, taking it out occasionally to confirm I had not imagined it, that it was still there, still perfect, still impossible. I finished my degree. I got a job. I moved away from Fairbanks. I built a normal life. But I never forgot that night. 20 years later, I returned to Fairbanks for a work conference. I had not been back since graduation. The city had grown, modernized, but the basic layout was the same. I found myself walking that same route from the university library to where my old apartment had been, following the path I had taken that night in 1977. Nothing strange happened. No time slip, no wind stopping, just a normal walk through a normal Alaskan city. But when I reached the spot where I thought the transition had occurred, I noticed something. A historical marker I had never seen before, recently installed. It described the Fairbanks downtown area as it had existed in the early 1900s. And according to the marker, on March 14, 1915, there had been a massive blizzard that killed 3 people and shut down the city for days. The same date as my newspaper. The same storm I had walked through, both in 1977 and, somehow, in 1915. I started researching. I found old photographs of Fairbanks from that era. The buildings I had seen matched the photographs exactly. The Mercantile, the Exchange, even the gas streetlights in the same positions I remembered. Everything I had witnessed was historically accurate down to the smallest detail. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. In the archives of the News Miner, there was a brief article from March 15, 1915. Just a few sentences. It described a strange incident during the blizzard. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a young man in bizarre clothing walking the streets, dressed in materials they could not identify, speaking English but using strange words. He had run when approached and vanished into the storm. Authorities assumed he was a prospector who had gone mad from isolation. They had seen me. I had left traces in their timeline. My presence in 1915 had been real enough that people noticed, talked about it, reported it to the newspaper. The time slip had not been a vision or a hallucination. I had actually been there, physically present in a past that was still present somewhere, somehow accessible under the right conditions. Over the years, I have talked to other people who lived in Fairbanks in the 1970s. Quietly, carefully, asking if they ever experienced anything strange during blizzards. Most looked at me like I was crazy, but a very few, got a strange expression on their faces. They would lean in close and describe experiences similar to mine. Streets that looked wrong, buildings from another era, the sensation of time becoming fluid. One woman told me she had walked through a blizzard in 1982 and found herself in what looked like the 1940s. She saw military vehicles and men in uniform, soldiers stationed at Fort Wainwright during World War II. She said she watched a parade that had happened 40 years earlier, saw her own grandmother as a young woman standing on the street corner. She had proof too, a photograph she had somehow grabbed from a vendor, dated 1943, showing the exact scene she had witnessed. Another man described slipping forward. He said during a particularly bad storm in 1979, he had walked into what he was certain was the future. He saw buildings that did not exist yet, technology he did not recognize, cars that looked like they came from science fiction. He said he had been terrified, convinced he was going insane, until he started seeing those exact buildings constructed in the 1990s, exactly as he remembered them from his vision. Fairbanks sits at a strange latitude. The winters are extreme, the darkness is profound, the cold is beyond what most humans are designed to endure. And during the worst blizzards, When visibility drops to zero and the wind howls like the earth is tearing itself apart, something happens. Time becomes unstable. The barriers between past, present, and future grow thin. And if you are unlucky enough to be walking through it, you might slip through. I still have that newspaper. I have shown it to experts who confirm the paper stock, the typeface, the printing methods are all consistent with 1915. But they cannot explain why it is in perfect condition. They cannot explain how I have a physical object from a time I was not alive to experience. So they conclude it must be a reproduction, a historical curiosity, a clever fake. But I know the truth. I was there. I walked those streets in 1915 while simultaneously existing in 1977. I experienced two times at once, overlapping, intersecting. And somewhere in the space between those moments, the blizzard created a bridge, a passage, a crack in the wall of linear time. It terrifies me because I know it can happen again. Every winter, when the storms hit Fairbanks, when the temperature drops and the wind rises and the snow falls thick enough to blot out the world, someone might slip through. They might find themselves walking streets from 100 years ago or 100 years in the future. They might bring something back, a newspaper or a photograph or some other impossible proof. And they will spend the rest of their lives wondering what they saw, wondering if it was real, wondering if the past and future are not fixed points but places we can visit under the right conditions. I am 70 years old now. I do not go out in blizzards anymore, but sometimes, on winter nights when the wind howls and the snow falls heavy, I look out my window and wonder. Wonder if someone is out there right now, walking through a time that is not their own. Wonder if they will bring back proof. Wonder if they will try to tell anyone, knowing they will not be believed. And I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed longer in 1915. If I had not run. If I had let time close around me and trap me there permanently, a man out of his own era, living in the past while the future continued without him. Would I have aged normally? Would I have found a way back? Or would I have become one of those strange stories that people tell? About the man in bizarre clothes who appeared during a blizzard and then vanished, leaving only questions and confusion in his wake. The newspaper sits in my safe deposit box, perfectly preserved, a piece of the past existing in the present. Physical proof that time is not what we think it is, that under extreme conditions, in certain places, the timeline can fracture. And if you were caught in that fracture during a Fairbanks blizzard, you might slip through to somewhere else. Someone else. And you might never find your way back. Story 10. Time slip. Have you ever lost time? I do not mean forgotten a few minutes or zoned out during a drive. I mean completely lost it. Lost years. Lost decades. Lost the present and found yourself somewhere that should not exist anymore. My name is Christopher Grant. In January 1977, I walked through a blizzard in Fairbanks, Alaska, and I did not come back to the same world I left. And I have proof. A newspaper from 1915 that sits in a safety deposit box in Anchorage. Physical evidence of something impossible. I was 20 years old, a junior at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, studying geology. On January 14th, I stayed late at the library working on a paper about permafrost degradation. The kind of dense, boring research that required complete silence and zero distractions. By the time I finished, it was after midnight. The blizzard had started around 10. I heard it building while I worked, wind howling against the library windows, but I figured it would pass. Fairbanks blizzards always passed, you just had to wait them out. But when I finally packed up my books and walked to the exit, I realized this one was different. The snow was coming down so thick I could barely see the parking lot lights. The wind cut through my jacket like it was made of paper. Temperature had to be 20 below, maybe worse with the wind chill. But my apartment was only 6 blocks away. I had walked home in worse conditions. I pulled my hood tight and started walking. The first 2 blocks were normal. Difficult, cold, miserable, but normal. I kept my head down, following the sidewalk by feel more than sight. The world around me was white noise and stinging snow. I passed the corner store, closed and dark, past the gas station where I sometimes bought coffee. Everything was where it should be. Then I crossed Cowell Street, and something changed. The sound shifted first. The howling wind became muffled, distant, like someone had wrapped the world in cotton. The cold eased, not disappeared, but softened. The snow was still falling, but it felt different against my face. Wetter, heavier. I looked up. The streetlights were wrong. Instead of the tall metal poles with electric bulbs, I saw shorter posts with glass lanterns. Gas lamps. The light they cast was warmer, yellower, flickering in a way electric lights never did. I stopped walking. My heart was pounding, but I could not figure out why. Everything looked wrong, but I could not process how or why it was wrong. The buildings along the street were the same general shapes, same basic locations, but the details were off. The corner store was there, but it looked older, smaller. The sign above the door advertised dry goods and tinned foods. And then I heard the horse. The sound of hooves on packed snow, the jingle of harness bells, the creak of wood and leather. I turned and saw a carriage coming down the street, an actual horse-drawn carriage. 2 horses pulling an enclosed cab with a driver hunched on the seat, wrapped in furs against the cold. The carriage passed within 10 feet of me. I could smell the horses, could hear the driver muttering to them, could see the warm breath steaming from their nostrils. The carriage had a date painted on the side in gold letters. Property of Fairbanks Transport Company. Established 1903. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the carriage continue down the street and disappear into the falling snow. My mind was trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Movie shoot, historical reenactment, some kind of festival, but it was after midnight in a blizzard. Nobody would be filming in these conditions. And the gas lamps were real. I could hear them hissing softly, see the flames dancing inside the glass. I started walking again because I did not know what else to do. The street looked familiar but ancient. The storefronts were different. Hand-painted signs advertising services that did not exist anymore. A blacksmith, a telegraph office, a boarding house. The buildings were wood construction, some of them 2 stories tall, with covered walkways connecting them. I passed a man on the sidewalk. He was wearing a heavy wool coat and a fur hat, smoking a pipe. He nodded at me as he passed. Just a casual greeting, like nothing was unusual, like I belonged there, but I did not belong there. I knew that with absolute certainty. This was not my Fairbanks. This was somewhere else, someone else. I kept walking, following what should have been my route home. But the landmarks were wrong. The apartment building where I lived was not there. Instead, there was a large house with a wraparound porch and smoke coming from the chimney. Through the windows I could see oil lamps burning inside. I stood in front of that house for a long time, trying to understand, trying to make sense of impossible things. The snow fell around me, softer now, almost gentle. The gas lamps cast their warm yellow light across the street. Somewhere in the distance I heard a train whistle, the old steam kind, long and mournful. Then I noticed the newspaper box. One of those covered wooden containers with a coin slot on the side. It was mounted on a post near the corner, painted red and green. The sign on top read Fairbanks Daily News Miner. 5 cents. I reached into my pocket. I had change, quarters and dimes from 1976 and 1977. I dropped a nickel into the slot. The mechanism was stiff, but it worked. The door opened. I pulled out a newspaper. The paper felt different from modern newspapers. Thicker, rougher. The ink smelled sharp and chemical. And the date on the masthead was January 15th, 1915. I stared at that date for a long time. Read it over and over. Checked the rest of the front page. Stories about the war in Europe. About local mining operations. About a town council meeting scheduled for next Tuesday. All written in the formal, verbose style of early 20th century journalism. I folded the newspaper carefully and put it inside my jacket. Evidence, proof, something to show that this was real, that I was not hallucinating or dreaming. That was when the wrongness hit me. Not the wrongness of being in 1915. A different wrongness, deeper, more fundamental. I was standing on a street in the past. But I did not belong to this past. I was contaminating it. My presence was a violation of something important, something sacred. And I felt watched, not by the people on the street, though a few had glanced at me curiously as they passed. No, this was something else. The universe itself was watching me, noticing the anomaly, the thing that did not fit. And I could feel it gathering around me like pressure before a storm. I needed to leave, needed to get back to my own time. But I had no idea how I had gotten here or how to reverse it. I started walking faster, retracing my steps, back up the street toward Cowles. Back toward where the transition had happened. The wind was picking up again. The snow was falling harder. The gas lamps were flickering, their light growing dimmer. And I could feel time itself pressing down on me, squeezing me, rejecting me like a foreign object. I reached Cowles Street and crossed it. The sound changed immediately. The muffled quiet exploded back into howling wind. The gentle snow became stinging ice. The warm gas lamps vanished, replaced by harsh electric streetlights. I stumbled forward, fell to my knees in deep snow. When I looked up, I was back. The corner store with its modern sign. The gas station with pumps and fluorescent lights. The apartment building where I lived, exactly where it should be. I reached inside my jacket. The newspaper was still there, solid and real. Proof that I had not imagined it. I made it home somehow. Climbed the stairs to my apartment, unlocked the door, collapsed on my bed still wearing my snow-covered jacket. The newspaper lay beside me on the pillow. Fairbanks Daily News Miner, January 15th, 1915. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table reading every word of that newspaper. Stories about people who had been dead for decades. Advertisements for products that no longer existed. A world that had vanished long before I was born. But here it was, physical evidence in my hands. The next morning, I tried to tell my roommate what had happened. He listened patiently, then suggested I might have gotten hypothermic. Hallucinated. Found an antique newspaper in a trash can somewhere and incorporated it into my delusion. He was not mean about it, just skeptical, concerned. I stopped trying to explain. I took the newspaper to a professor in the history department. Told him I found it in my grandmother's attic. He examined it carefully, used a magnifying glass to check the print quality, tested the paper composition. It was real, authentic, an actual newspaper from January 15th, 1915. The professor was excited, asked if I had more, offered to buy it for the university archive. But I told him no, I needed to keep it, because it was the only proof I had, the only evidence that what happened to me was real. And I needed that evidence because strange things kept happening after that night. I would be walking down streets I had known my whole life and suddenly nothing would look right. Buildings would seem older or newer than they should be. Cars would look wrong. People would dress in styles that did not match the decade. It only lasted seconds, little slips, but it kept happening. And I started noticing gaps in time, missing minutes where I could not account for my location. I would be in class and suddenly realize I had no memory of the last 10 minutes. Or I would be reading and look up to find an hour had passed in what felt like seconds. The worst was when I started seeing myself. Brief glimpses in crowds or across streets. A figure that looked exactly like me, wearing clothes I did not own, walking with purpose toward destinations I could not know. My doppelganger. My other self. The version of me that existed in all the other times I kept slipping into. I dropped out of school at the end of that semester. Told my parents I needed a break. Needed to figure things out. I moved to Seattle, then Portland, then Denver. Kept moving because staying in one place made the slips worse. The more familiar I became with a location, the more likely I was to see it at the wrong time. To walk through it in 1952 or 1980 or 1923. The newspaper went into a safety deposit box. I could not keep it with me because it was deteriorating. 62 years old when I found it. Now it is over 100. The paper is brittle and yellow. The ink is fading, but it still exists. Still proves that on January 14th, 1977, I walked through a blizzard and ended up 62 years in the past. I am 67 years old now, almost 50 years since that night in Fairbanks. And the time slips have not stopped. If anything, they are getting worse. More frequent, lasting longer. Sometimes I spend hours in the wrong decade before snapping back. Sometimes days. I have walked through Prohibition-era speakeasies and Cold War fallout drills and disco clubs and grunge concerts. I have seen 1,000 versions of America that existed before or after my time. I have become unstuck, a ghost haunting my own timeline, unable to stay anchored in any single moment. And I have started to understand something terrible. The time slip in Fairbanks was not random. It was not an accident. Something in that blizzard, something in the specific conditions of that night, opened a crack in time. And I fell through, or was pulled through. But I was never supposed to come back. The universe tried to keep me in 1915. Tried to trap me there where I could not contaminate other timelines. And when I forced my way back, I damaged something. Broke something fundamental about the nature of time and my relationship to it. Now I am a walking wound in the fabric of reality. Everywhere I go, I create these little tears, these brief openings where past and present and future blur together. And one day, I know one of those tears will become permanent. One day I will slip into another time and I will not slip back. Maybe I will end up in 1915. Maybe I will finally arrive at that destination the universe chose for me 62 years too late. Or maybe I will fall all the way through, tumbling backward through decades and centuries until I emerge somewhere so far removed from my own time that I become a legend. A story. A man who appeared from nowhere speaking a strange language and carrying impossible objects. The newspaper is still in that safety deposit box in Anchorage. My proof, my evidence, the only physical remnant of the night I lost my place in time. If you are listening to this and you do not believe me, I do not blame you. I would not believe it either if I had not lived it. But I am telling you this because you need to know. Time is not fixed. It is not solid. It is more like ice on a lake. Mostly stable, mostly safe. But there are thin spots, weak places where the pressure of reality wears through. And if you step on one of those thin spots, you can fall through. You can end up somewhere you do not belong, somewhere you were never meant to be. And if that happens to you, if you ever find yourself on a familiar street that has become unfamiliar, if you see gas lamps where streetlights should be or hear horses where cars should be, do not take anything with you. Do not grab a newspaper or a coin or any physical object from that other time. Because when you bring something back, you create a connection, a thread linking you to that other moment. And threads can pull in both directions. My name is Christopher Grant. On January 14th, 1977, I walked through a blizzard and found myself in 1915. And I have been falling through time ever since, slipping between moments, haunting decades, unable to stay anchored in the present. And someday soon, I will disappear completely. I will take one final step and fall through the ice. And somewhere, someone will find me wandering their streets. A ghost from another time, lost and confused and holding a newspaper that proves I was telling the truth all along. The last whisper fades, but the cold lingers. If you felt the dark tonight, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story waits just beyond the ice. Tell us where you're listening from or share your own strange encounter. Your words feed the fire here at Midnight Whispers. Alaska's night is long, and our stories are longer. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your footsteps soft.